You are listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. And I guess I should begin by saying I'm in my West African mood. I should say Nanga Def. And we're on the line with Dr. Gerald Horne, who is the author of about 50 books, and he is riding high on his new release on the book on the Black Panther Party. And I guess I wanted to greet Dr. Horne. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, fine. And I can't wait to ask you and your comrades a question.
Shoot.
Okay, the question is this. This morning's New York Times has an article about the presidential campaign in the United States. Recall that a few days ago in Chicago, Republican nominee Donald J. Trump began to speak about his presumptive competitor, speaking of Vice President Kamala Harris. And the New York Times article begins with the words, "not like us." In other words, Mr. Trump
Yes.
was suggesting that Kamala Harris, being of African and South Asian descent, that she's not like us, meaning us being the European settler community. And of course, that is a thinly veiled reference to a recent so-called diss track by Kendrick Lamar of your hometown, Los Angeles, directed at Drake of your new hometown, Correct. Toronto. So my question is this. I know that Kendrick Lamar's diss of Drake was greeted enthusiastically, apparently, in Black Los Angeles. I'm wondering what has been the reaction of Kendrick Lamar's diss track in Black Toronto. And when he says Drake is not like us, how is that perceived? Is it because he's Canadian? Is it because he's so-called racially mixed? Is it because of something else?
Well, I'll go first, Melinda, if you don't mind. Kendrick Lamar, first of all, Kendrick Lamar had come to Toronto to a restaurant in Toronto and ate some food and came out praising this particular restaurant, and it boosted the sales of this particular restaurant. And after that diss track came out, I was watching the news, the local news, not a black news, not an Afrocentric station, but the main station in Toronto. And I would say that 95% of the people in Toronto, African, Asian, Euro-Canadian, they were on Kendrick Lamar's side. It was kind of crazy.
So, I mean, what does that say about Drake?
Drake is first of all, I must admit, I can't deny it. I've been probably one of Drake's biggest fans. I've gotten criticism even from my comrade Melinda. You know, a lot of people can't stand Drake, and I like Drake as an artist, but Drake doesn't stand for anything in terms of. And I was in the same. I'd never met his father, but I was in the same room with Drake's father a couple of times, and I got into a little debate with Mr. Stevie Wonder, and his father is a genuine character. Spends most of his time in Asia, and he is, well, put it this way, he looks just. They claim he's related to Drake and Larry Graham are supposedly cousins, and Larry Graham said he didn't know anything about it. But if you look at Larry Graham and you look at Drake's father, they almost look like identical twins.
Melinda.
That's interesting. My whole take on the Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef, I was kind of disappointed with Kendrick, and not for any, particular. It's just the fact is that I feel like this beef that's been going on between them two, it always comes up when, you know, there's marketing to be done. So it's like sort of like beef marketing that I was kind of disappointed, and especially when you know, it's really nothing over nothing. Like I didn't engage in it, I would say. So, but like as Norman says, that I'm not a big fan of Drake. Drake is a pop artist basically, and you know, a lot of his tracks are like catchy, but yeah, he doesn't really say anything. Drake it will be Drake, right? So so that was my whole thing with my reaction with the whole beef. But it's interesting that now This Is Us track is now being used in various like you know, contexts. I saw that it was being used in, you know, the Kenyan protests, and now Trump is using it. So that's very interesting. It can be used in any, you know, context. You know, it's very kind of tribal. So that's my take. I mean, like the fact that Trump is using it, I don't know how great, you know, it's great it is anyway. So that's my take. It's interesting that it's being used by Trump anyway.
Well,
and Gerald, could I say this before you go?
Sure.
One of my favorite songs of all time, and I know I might get booed for this, but one of my favorite songs of all time is "I Know When the Hotline Bling." I love that track, you know, and that's me.
It's pretty. That is a catchy tune, yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about releasing my own track called "Like Us," because I think we need to start talking about bringing some folks together to fight the fascist threat, basically. And in any case, speaking of the fascist threat, let's get down to brass tacks. We're all following very carefully what's going on in West Asia. We all know that a few days ago, the war criminals in Israel had an attack on Beirut, wiping out a leading militant in Hezbollah, followed apparently by a bombing that has been ascribed to the Israelis in Iran, wiping out Mr. Haniyeh, a leader of Hamas, with whom they were negotiating with for release of the detainees. And we're all on pins and needles, awaiting what could be a massive retaliation against the Israelis, coming from Iran, coming from Hezbollah, coming from Hamas, coming from the Yemenis, perhaps coming from some Iraqi forces. It's quite incredible what we may be on the verge of. And of course, the United States has sent a flotilla to that part of the world, presumably to bail out the Israelis. In turn, the Russians have supplied the Iranians with sophisticated fighter jets and other military materiel. We've oftentimes said on this side of the border that the Democrats could well lead us into World War III. And I'm afraid to say that it seems as if that prognostication is coming true. Now, you may wonder why Mr. Netanyahu would be so reckless with regard to his recent activities. Well, Israel is facing major problems right now. The International Court of Justice has said that the settlements are illegal. Prime Minister Starmer in London has removed British blocking of the International Criminal Court attempt to prosecute him. You have major protests in Israel, some of which are quite odious. I mean, for example, you've had this case of Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian militants, and an attempt to punish them led to an attack upon the state. And so Israel itself seems to be veering into civil war, and you may be able to suggest that rather than face civil war, Mr. Netanyahu would prefer to precipitate World War III. And when you look at the fact that Syria which had been in the process of being destabilized for more than a decade by its neighbor, Turkey or Turkey. But now they've reconciled, and President Erdogan of Turkey has been issuing thinly veiled threats towards Israel. So Mr. Netanyahu is facing a wide array of antagonists. Now, supposedly what triggered his recklessness was the fact that in the illegally occupied Golan Heights, Syrian territory, illegally occupied by Israel, there was a killing on a soccer field that he ascribed to the Hezbollah, which is unlikely in light of the politics of those families who were deprived of their loved ones. But in any case, this is a very serious matter. And let us trust and hope that when the Iranians and their allies retaliate, because I think we can expect them to retaliate, let us hope that it does not spiral out of control and lead to World War III.
Dr. Horne, let me ask you this. Listening to you speak, for the last little while, you seem to think that Biden's position on Israel is even to the right of Donald Trump's. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say that the Democrats, more specifically, are to the right of the Republicans on the Russia-Ukraine question. I mean, because both Mr. Trump and his VP running mate, J.D. Vance, have both suggested pulling out of Ukraine because they want to focus on China. And I think that the Democrats are trying to focus on both, which I think is harebrained at best. Part of the problem is, and you can glean this from some of the writing that I've done, is that if you want to ask a fundamental question, which is, how is it that if you look at the Western Hemisphere, that Spain had a first mover's advantage, which is one of the reasons why from Mexico heading south to the tip of Argentina, most of the people speak either Spanish or the neighboring language that is Portuguese. And so how is it that in the United States, the primary language is English? Well, what happened basically is that the Protestant underdogs, Protestant London, of course, is part of the landscape nowadays, they cut a deal because they were under siege by the Catholics in Spain and Portugal. So they cut a deal with the Jewish diaspora, even though London had expelled its Jewish population at the end of the 13th century. And so they were able to take advantage of Jewish diaspora networks, and the Jewish community played a role in terms of the revolt against London that led to the formation of the United States of America. You had Jewish leaders in the 19th century who were major slave owners, including Judah Benjamin of Louisiana, including Senator Yulee, Yulee, of Florida. And as a result, despite anti-Jewish fervor, the Jewish community has been essential to the fortunes of the United States of America, which leads us to today, where you have a powerful pro-Israel lobby spearheaded in part by Jewish Americans, of course, accompanied by white Christian nationalists. And so, in a sense, it's almost a kind of parallel that you see that the Anglosphere was able to attain prominence in North America, not least because of cutting a deal with the Jewish diaspora. And as the Anglosphere is increasingly under threat and under challenge by China, by Russia, the Anglosphere is declining. Enough, may be what tips the Anglosphere into permanent decline. I trust that you follow the logic I've tried to lay out.
I'm following it, but the phone went silent for a couple of seconds. But I think I understand what you're articulating, right?
Okay.
Do we want to move to France, Morocco, and Western Sahara?
Well, that's another controversy, because what's happening is that in 1975, when the Spanish dictator Franco passed away, the last Spanish colony in Africa sought to declare independence under the leadership of Polisario. I'm speaking of Western Sahara. But Morocco sought to claim this territory. Algeria objected. And generally speaking, the international community has been supporting Algeria's position. But what happened in the last week or so is that France has cut a deal with Morocco so that Morocco can take over Western Sahara, which is rich in phosphates, which are essential for fertilizers. Now, there hangs a tale because, I'm working on a book on North Africa that deals in large part with North Africa. And if you look at the history of Morocco, a major theme of Morocco has been anti-Blackness. In fact, in the late 1600s, despite the strictures of Islam, the leaders of Morocco sought to enslave every dark-skinned person, believe it or not. I mean, it sounds like the United States of America. Not surprisingly, when the United States declared independence, Morocco was not first in line, but was in the front of the line in terms of recognizing the United States. Recall that in my 16th century book, I pointed out that if you want to understand how London came to spearhead the African slave trade, go back to the late 1590s when London and Morocco were allies, and London funded and armed Morocco as it attacked south, the Songhai Empire in today's Mali, which of course destabilized that country with ripples and ramifications and repercussions reaching as far south as today's Nigeria. So Morocco has a very questionable and odious record, which was magnified during the Trump years when it signed the so-called Abraham Accords, which involved a kind of de facto recognition of Israel. And this is the payoff, with France now saying that it's going to recognize Morocco's claim to Western Sahara. It's a very complicated, complex situation. It's going to worsen relations between Algeria and Morocco. I know you know, Norman, that after Algerian independence in 1962, there was a sharp conflict between Algeria and Morocco. Interestingly enough, in October of 1962, the then Algerian leader Ben Bella met with Martin Luther King Jr. and denounced without reservation U.S. apartheid, U.S. Jim Crow. But then his regime was weakened because of this conflict with Morocco, perhaps not coincidentally. Soon thereafter, Ben Bella himself was overthrown. So we're going to have to do something about Morocco. And then, Norman, you may want to comment on this question of the fact that amongst Black Americans, historically, there has been a strand of thought that argues that Black Americans, that we're all Moroccans. I'm sure you've heard that story.
Let me say, before I deal with that, Randy Weston, I believe, lived in Morocco. Randy Weston, who was a good friend of this show, and you knew Randy, you knew his music. Randy, I think he had a nightclub in Morocco. And in terms of the Western Sahara, another mutual friend of ours, Herb Boyd, went to Western Sahara, and you can check his writings on Western Sahara. I would advise listeners to point your browsers to Herb Boyd and check that out. But in terms of the Moorish Americans, the Moorish Americans are Noble Ali. I guess Noble Ali. I think he was born in Newark, New Jersey, and he has a lot of many followers today. And I'm going to be pretty frank. They're pretty conservative. They claim not to be like the rest of like most of us. They claim they want to be more Arab than African, or should I say, what is the anthropological definite? They don't identify with the Bantu situation, and politically they're pretty conservative in my judgment. And I understand. Fred Hampton Jr. told me years ago that in the prisons in Illinois, that the Moorish Americans had basically made a deal with the prisons, and they were basically had a little autonomy inside the prison. They could do certain things that other prisoners couldn't do because they had made a deal essentially with the state. I don't know how true that. Well, I heard that from Fred Jr. Or had you heard any stories like that?
So just to make sure I heard you correctly, their line too is not like us.
Yes. Some of them, most of them, yes. But like most of our organizations, they got different factions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, stay tuned for my cut, like us.
So you don't want to tenor.
Say that again.
I say you don't want my falsetto on there, do you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
that would be
sure.
Amazing. Let's get into the Venezuela elections.
It's very complicated. That July 28th, you had elections in Venezuela. The Maduro regime apparently prevailed. What's interesting about this election is that because of past problems with elections, it's very difficult to pull off what the Maduro regime is being accused of, which is stuffing the ballot box. But alas, that's what they're being accused of by Washington. Fortunately, Cuba, Nicaragua, Russia, China, Iran, and thankfully Mexico are not going along with this. And before the July 28th election, there was an article in the Financial Times of London that suggested that U.S. imperialism may be forced to go along with it because the sanctions on Venezuela has caused an outflow of over 7 million people streaming into Chicago and New York in particular, complicating the administrations of Democratic mayors in those two major U.S. cities. And of course, sanctions have hampered the ability of Venezuela to produce oil. Increased sanctions might hamper further Venezuela's ability to produce oil, which could then contribute to inflation in the United States as an election is approaching. So the Financial Times of London suggested before the election that the U.S. administration may do a few head fakes in the direction of seeming to crack down on Maduro and his regime, but ultimately reconcile. I'm not so sure about that. On the other hand, if they do increase sanctions against Venezuela, and to return to our original story, and then increase sanctions against Iran, another major oil producer, not only will that cause the price of gasoline at the pump to go up, which of course then could benefit the major oil producers like Exxon and Chevron, et cetera, but it also could benefit Russia, which we were continually told is public enemy number one for this Democratic administration, at least, and is a major oil producer. So it's a very complicated scenario. I'm not willing at this point to make a prediction. My crystal ball is in mothballs, hampering that particular ability. But certainly the comrades in Venezuela merit and deserve our solidarity.
You're listening to Diasporic Music. I think I wanted to move on to the Olympics. The new Olympic champion of the 100 meters woman-wise, and they were running, I think, the heats when I started this show. But we had St. Lucia is a country in the English-speaking Caribbean and they've had several Nobel laureates, quote unquote, Sir William Arthur Lewis and Derek Alston Walcott, the Honorable Derek Alston Walcott. He's come to Toronto a couple of times. What are your thoughts on the Olympics?
Well, if you look at the medals total, there are predictable results. China, US, France, Australia, Britain, Japan. Although I'm expecting the African nations to surge once we get to the 10,000 meters, the 5,000 meters, perhaps what we would call the mile, for example. It'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of the 100-meter dash, which is a premier event with regard to these Olympics. Do you have any predictions there?
I believe Thompson, the young guy out of Jamaica, I think he is going to take it. There are Jamaicans that are predicting that Noel Lyles is not even going to win place or show. They say they're predicting one Jamaican commentator is predicting a Jamaican sweep in 100 meters. I don't know if I would go that far. I don't think that Noah's going to win. I think Thompson is going to. I think Thompson is going to win, and I don't think that Andre DeGrasse is he's going to make the finals, but his race is 200 meters. He can't. I don't think he has. Well, he doesn't get started until about the 150. So I would look for him. He might medal again in the 200 meters, but I'm going with Brother Thompson for the gold in 100 meters. That's my prediction.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about basketball? I mean, I see that your Canadian friends are doing quite well. Is that true?
Very, 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 very true. Canada's got is up there when it comes to producing professional basketball players, because you have a pool of people here primarily from the Caribbean as well as Africa, and you have Toronto has become a basketball town, thanks to people like Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady and Kyle Lowry, and Masai Ujiri is a great basketball man, and I don't know how far. I think they're gonna. We might. I think we might. I don't think we're gonna take a goal, but we might. I think we're in the mix.
I was happy to see that South Sudan a week or two ago in an exhibition game only lost to the U.S. team by 1 point. That was quite impressive. Now, of course, they lost by double digits in a subsequent official game, but that bespeaks the administrative ability of Luol Deng of South Sudanese heritage, former Duke University Flash, former member of the Chicago Bulls and LA Lakers, and he's really been quite essential in terms of helping to develop talent in that young African country.
Let me ask you a question. What is wrong with Gilbert Arenas, or I should say Gilberto Arenas, who's really a Cuban? Why is he making so many off-the-wall statements as a man? I mean, the Cubans are among the best, not should say the best, most conscious, if not the most conscious set of Africans on the planet Earth. What's wrong with that young man?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I haven't done a psychoanalysis of him, nor have I spoken with him. But generally speaking, what happens is that people are trying to get publicity for their podcasts. And the way you get publicity for your podcast is to make outrageous statements. And perhaps that drives up your value on YouTube. I mean, you know, you got all these YouTubers now who are in a business partnership with YouTube because YouTube sells ads against their programming and then sends you a check. And so you can make a living from doing podcasts and then putting it on YouTube. And so that's just speculation on my part. Like I said, I don't know the young man. I've never spoken with him, although I have followed his basketball career quite closely.
He's a hell of a basketball player. Can't take that away from him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cannot. You can't. I think his son is supposedly pretty good as well.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're getting close to the end, and once again, if you have any insight on this Drake Kendrick Lamar beef, let me know. Particularly to return to my original question, was he aiming his sword at Drake's being from Canada or being biracial? Is that part of not being like us? I mean, that's the question I have.
I think
first of all, I go ahead, Melinda. I cut you off.
No, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's all rolled up in one. I think it's either or. I think it's both.
Well, Kendrick's background is Chicago, Los Angeles, Chicago, Compton, and for lack of a better term, being a member of the tribe of Shabazz, which I am a member of the tribe of Shabazz. We don't have an exemplary record of we have been influenced by U.S. chauvinism, and some of our folk have been influenced by white nationalism, you know. And some of us think that because we're in the United States that we're a little bit smarter, a little bit faster, a little bit slicker than the rest of us. And I'm looking at the book, The West, and what is it? Ken Waisel's book. That's one of my favorite books. But anyway, does that answer your question, sir?
All I have to say in closing is watch out for my response track, like us.
All right.